Hi, my name is Maddie Moy and welcome to my EUB343 showcase, in which I will talk from my professional experience and inform about professional practice. I'm a third year Bachelor of Primary Education student and I was lucky enough to have Bessie Stone as my tutor for my 10 till 12 Tuesday class. My host school was West End State School, also known as WES. This multicultural co-ed primary school ranges from prep to grade 6 and has a teaching staff of 79 to care for and teach the 1,214 students enrolled. I was working in a Year 6 classroom with 27 11 to 12-year-olds, 5 in which had lower learning abilities. My key learning intention was in the subject area of mathematics, which I'm specialising in at QT currently. After negotiation with my supervising teacher, it was decided that I would have the responsibility of teaching the students the new maths unit in which they were learning the order of operations using the strategy PEMDAS. The two content descriptors that I aligned my teaching with were ACMNA 134 and ACMNA 123, which are both circled in red on the screen. By the end of my time at the school and the end of their 4-week unit, I aim to teach the students to successfully apply the strategy of PEMDAS when faced with solving an algebraic equation. Core teaching strategies were implemented throughout the teaching of this unit in order to optimise student learning. First of all, diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment is a vital part of student learning as it helps teachers to gauge students' understanding and skills prior to the commencement of the unit. Teachers can then use this data to inform differentiation of teaching and learning. I started the unit by posing a formative assessment to the students. I created a worksheet and handed it out for the students to complete prior to any teaching. The pretest required students to solve 2 equations, write a numerical expression derived from a word problem, circle which part of 3 different equations they would solve first, add in brackets to make an equation true, and then write a short explanation of why they added these brackets in, where they did. Students were then given 5 minutes to complete this pretest, and the results of the pretest were kept by me, the teacher. In order to mark the pretest, my supervising teacher and I decided that out of 10 possible marks, a student would receive an A grade if they got 7 to 10 correct, 5 out of 6 correct would be a B grade, 4 to 3 would be a C grade, and anything below would be considered a fail. Out of the class, 0 students received an A, 2 students received a B, 10 students received a C, and another 13 students ranged from getting 0 to 3 marks out of the possible 10. 3 students' work has been selected to be examples to track evidence of learning. These students will be referred to as student A, B, and C. Student A, B, and C all have the common errors in their tests, being that they completed the equation from left to right, as opposed to using the order of operations. As this is a completely new unit, this was to be expected and posed an exciting challenge to me as a teacher. In my first lesson, I posed them with another equation and addressed the common errors that were made in the pretest. I then introduced the students to the concept of PEMDAS. I went through what the letters were an acronym for and gave them a mnemonic device, as they are proven to help your brain better encode and remember information. After I explained why it is necessary to have an order and what the order actually was, I allowed the students to explore how brackets affected equations by having 2 equations with the same numbers, but one with brackets. This allowed for exploration-based learning, where students would be challenged and engaged. I also incorporated games and autonomy for the students in each of my lessons, where I would get them to roll a dice or pick a card, and this number would be representative of a number we would use in an equation, which we would then do as a class. I also created PEMDAS Bingo, which the students loved and were very engaged and consequently learning from. Furthermore, I constantly made the children explain what they were doing out loud so that their understanding was solidified. I also incorporated the use of check-ins before each lesson to see how much knowledge was retained by the students. This is another form of formative assessment and allows for teachers to see what they need to revisit and what they can move on from. Students A, B, and C, along with 12 other students, all received 5 out of 5 marks on their check-in. This was a very positive sign of learning and meant that I could advance to harder equations and begin to start on word problems. After the first 2 weeks, most students had become competent at simple equations and writing and solving equations derived from word problems. So that means I can move on to the explanation part of their assessment. I incorporated the use of the gradual release of responsibility model so that students felt supported throughout their learning. I explained and wrote on the board an example response to a question asking, how do brackets change this equation? In the next lesson, 2 equations were given to the students, one with brackets and one without. As a class, we then had to write a comparison explanation about how the brackets change the answers. This was then repeated in the next lesson, where the equations were changed and students had to individually do so. For their homework, I incorporated explanation questions for students to individually complete. It is clear that with students A, B, and C, their explanation has vastly improved from the pretest and in-class activities. So on the screen, I have an example of student A, who vastly improved their explanation. Here's student B, and that's student C. So all showing great improvement in explanation and knowledge. Differentiation was a huge part of my teaching strategy, as I want to allow all of my students to have an opportunity to develop their learning as best they can. Whenever there was writing involved, I would allow the students with dysgraphia to use the iPad, and the student with dyslexia also had a special iPad they would use in the classroom whenever writing was required in my lessons. I differentiated my worksheet to cater for the different learning levels in the classroom and allocated students with the worksheet I felt suited their learning needs best. Here's an example of 2 homework sheets I have differentiated, the one on the left being the higher level and the one on the right being the lower. The main points of differentiation were that in question 1, on the left, in the left-hand sheet, the equations had 4 numbers, whereas on the right, the equations had 3. In the second question, the left required students to create a numerical equation derived from a word problem, and on the right, they just had to tick the correct equation which matched the word problem. And finally, the left required a paragraph explanation for the final question, whereas the one on the right just required a few sentences. I also created advanced worksheets for when fast working students had finished tasks and wanted to extend their learning. In future placements, if I were to complete this teaching unit again, I would try to give students more individualized feedback after each lesson. Feedback gives students a recipe for future action and can be used by the student to improve performance. The more feedback I give to my students, the greater chance they have of succeeding. I did also give students a large amount of verbal feedback in comparison to written, and for my next placement, I will try to give more written, as students then have a greater chance at remembering what I've said and can look back on the notes that I've written when they want to improve. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed my time teaching at West End State School. Teaching this maths unit on my own was a great opportunity to incorporate the many teaching strategies I have learned throughout my time at QUT, and it was amazing and humbling to see the students' knowledge and skills grow over the course of 4 weeks. Thank you very much for listening.